episode 56 of the Hockey Hub. Sophia, Brick, and Judd with you guys as we are doing a post-mortem on the end of the Bruins season, which ended a couple of days ago. Game 82 is the last one they'll be playing. Other teams gearing up for the playoffs. But, we did this in the broadcast. You guys did it in the booth. We did it at the desk, just kind of wrapping things up, and might as well put a bow tie on it before our podcast shifts to other things on the Bruins season. Guys, we're going to go highs and lows. That's kind of how I live my life anyway. It's a good analogy of my life. Little roller coaster ride. Trying to help that, but not working. But the Bruins season, that's kind of what we're going to do. The themes are going to be highs and lows. And we're going to start with the summer and the off season. And that's something Brick, I don't know where was it on the desk or maybe it was in person. We were just chatting, but we had kind of discussed that it really could have started in the summer. And Don Sweeney himself, talked about that the summer and the training camp didn't go to plan. He didn't get a couple things done that he wished he would have in retrospect and hindsight. And it started to trickle into the start of the season. Let's begin with a couple of unsigned contracts. One to Jeremy Swayman, which we know extended into training camp. Brad Marchand, the captain, going into the season without a contract. And the head coach without a contract. So how does the summer, even though I would never have thought that would have affected when it came to hockey, how can those things affect the start of a season for a team?
Yeah, you wish that wasn't the case, from where we sit and how we view things. We're not in the locker room and we're not in the negotiation room for that matter, but you would have liked to have seen those loose ends, and those were big loose ends, tied up at some point during training camp. You would have liked to have seen the Bruins and Jeremy Swayman find some common ground. You'd like to see Brad Marchand and the Bruins find some common ground, and you'd like to see the head coach and the Bruins find some common ground, because essentially that comes down to the effect that it has, and it was a negative effect in retrospect, the effect that it has on the leadership portion of the hockey team. We've always said that culture in the Bruins locker room was a real thing. It was a tangible thing. It was the envy of the National Hockey League. Anybody that came here from outside the Bruins organization, they spoke of that, how welcoming it was, and how it made you feel like you played your best hockey because of what that culture was like in the room. You mattered. You were part of it. Whether you played 5 minutes or 25 minutes, you were an important piece of a winning culture. And that was seriously affected, and it started in training camp. And I think we all thought that because history was on the Bruins side, that things would work out. They would find the solutions. They would find the answers, and the things that they valued most, like the head coach, like the captain, like the goaltender, that they would resolve those issues, and it would be all about team and winning. But when we look back at it, I don't think the Bruins ever recovered from the unease and the uncertainty of what we witnessed during training camp.
And what did that then lead to, Sophia? That led to the Bruins getting off to a poor start. They started 8-9-3. They made the coaching change. And one of the things the Bruins, other than maybe the 17-18 season where it took a little bit of time for Bruce Cassidy in his first full year as a head coach to get that team pointed in the right direction, to find the identity that they wanted. The Bruins, other than that season, have gotten off to the start that they wanted. They put themselves in a position to land the playoffs. And instead, because the Bruins got off to that slow start, well, now they had a whole lot of ground to make up, and that's awfully difficult. So as we sit here right now and we record this, and let's assume that the Montreal Canadiens don't pick up another point and still land the last playoff spot in the Eastern Conference, the Bruins would miss the playoffs by 13 points. That's really not a lot. What are we talking about? We're talking about a total of 7 more wins for the Bruins. Could they have fashioned that across 6.5 months to be able to get themselves into a playoff position? But because of that training camp that you guys allude to, that led into the start that the Bruins had. And to Brick's point, I go back to one of the things that Don Sweeney had mentioned when he made the coaching change. And he said, our team can't get through the adversity within a game, and they can't respond from game to game. And part of that, might have been some of the unsettled business that the Bruins had heading into the season. Listen, when we talk about what happened to the Bruins this season and why they're not in the playoffs, there are many reasons for it. But, Brick, if we went back to a greatest hits some of the things that we talked about at length during the course of the season when games were on the line and the playoffs were still to be determined? How often did we talk about, Brick, self-inflicted mistakes, winnable games, poor execution, and uphill hockey? And that's what the Bruins experienced for the bulk of the campaign.
Yeah, and let's be clear that, when we started this conversation, topic number one, and talked about the uncertainties and the fact that guys did not have contracts, that is not skewed just towards management. The players are involved as well. It's not a 50-50 split. It's 100-100 on both sides. Like I said, we're not in the room. I don't know what Brad Marchand wanted. I don't know what the Bruins offered. And I would say the same for Jeremy Swayman until we saw the numbers after it was resolved. Was there not enough belief in Jim Montgomery to get the job done? They won a ton of games during the regular season. They didn't have success in the postseason, and was that the deciding factor to move on? But to your point, Judd, I just sum it up with mental toughness. You look at all the poor numbers for the Boston Bruins, and you touched on a number of things. But late goals in periods, giving up goals in rapid succession, unforced icings at the wrong time, offensive zone stick infractions, particularly early in the year when there's nothing happening and you're taking these terrible penalties. Special teams, they never got a handle on their special teams on either side of the puck, whether it was PK or power play. The list is lengthy on what was wrong with this team, but because your leadership was affected right from day one, I think that leads to the lack of mental toughness that's required to pull yourself out of those down points during a regular season.
And let's add one more layer to that, Sophia and Brick, if we can. It wasn't just some of the issues that you're having with some of the leadership and not having things solidified. There was a tier underneath leadership, guys who were under contract. Guys like Charlie Coyle or Brandon Carlo. Trent Frederick, by the way, is another guy who was up for contract, and that was unsettled. And I think the Bruins offered him a multi-year deal, and ultimately he chose not to sign that deal and was dealt to the Edmonton Oilers. But one of the things that the captain, Brad Marchand, had talked about when we sat down and had a conversation in Dallas was we have to get out of our own heads. This was early in the season. This was before the coaching change was made. And the Bruins were struggling with some of the things that Brick alluded to, that mental toughness, that mental fortitude that they just couldn't snap out of and gain any type of rhythm or foothold.
And and just one more thought, Soph, before we move on.
Yeah.
Put me in the group or the category or the majority that said this is still a playoff team. It really wasn't until the mass exodus in March of the trading deadline that it dawned on me, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. I still believe that they still had enough talent on that roster and enough hockey wisdom and hockey IQ and good coaching, and that Swayman would find his game. I still believe that it was a playoff team until they weren't.
And by the way, so on March 6th, after the game, or heading into that game right before the trade deadline in Tampa, the Bruins had 64 points. The Ottawa Senators had the last wild card spot in the East with 67. The Bruins were 3 points out of a playoff spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really like the numbers you bring up, Judd, with just 13 points out of that wild card spot. If they had just won, 6-7 more games over the course of 6 months, when you put it that way, it's obviously very doable. But then you obviously talk about the DNA of the team and would they have had what it takes to, come from behind or not give up late leads or all that kind of stuff, I just want to ask a follow-up. I have one extreme example. This is like at the, extreme positives of what a captain can do for a team, and it's when Patrice Bergeron rallied the guys mid-game. I think it was against Detroit. They let in 2 back-to-back goals early on. Nesson had this shot of him at the bench kind of calling everyone over to the huddle. I'm sure you guys remember. And then the team, mid-game, and then the team kind of rallied around him and won. I believe at least they fought back, but that was a moment we showed on Nesson a lot. And the DNA of the team was very different. The believability, they knew they had it in him. He just kind of needed to shake them up. So, Brick, what's happening in a room when or I guess I'm wondering, what are the root causes? Because it's not talent. Everyone in the NHL is very talented, and yes, there are some rosters and players and youth that still need to develop some things that have more talent, so to speak, than others. But it can't just be that. So what's happening in a room when you are constantly, having bad second periods, not getting shots on that, not communicating, not organized, and blowing leads? What is that root cause? Is it just disagreement in a room? Is it what's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use that word disagreement, but the room gets fractured. It gets splintered. It becomes a little bit more individual than the group mentality, the team mentality. It becomes almost like survival mode. I'm going to worry about myself and just make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing and let the results fall where they may, and it just kind of fractures that unity that is required of elite teams. And when things aren't going well, it's that believability in one another, and I'm playing for my teammate that gets tarnished. And it's human nature. It's what happens, and it's that lack of leadership that was there for the longest time that kept that togetherness, intact. And that's really what I felt from what we were watching, and when we were watching and analyzing and trying to determine what was going on with this team when they couldn't get that traction that's required to put a winning streak together, let alone 3 good periods. When you can't put a 60-minute effort together, that is a telltale sign that the room isn't as strong as it needs to be. And I hate to describe the Bruins locker room like that. Again, I'm not in there, but I've been on teams where this has crept in. When it was a good situation, then it starts to get sour, and you don't have the necessary strong leadership to make sure that it doesn't continue to permeate the rest of the room. And I think from a distance, that's what I was watching. I don't know if, Judd, if you agree with that, but that's what it looked like to me, because I know I've been in those situations, and I know it was a couple generations ago, but I think it's still pretty constant or pretty consistent with what can happen when losing sets in.
And I think there's 2 other names that I start to think about that were part of that leadership group or core for the Bruins that also didn't get off to a great start to help a guy like your captain or help your head coach at the time, and that's Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm. So Charlie ended up playing 50 games overall, but as I remember, at least the first 20 before under Jim Montgomery and before the coaching change, Charlie McAvoy did not get off to the strongest of starts, and Hampus Lindholm, while the points may reflect it, I don't think he was necessarily bringing his A game on a regular basis. It was certainly a decent start for a guy like Hampus Lindholm. But I think one of the things that I know, Brick, that we had talked about is that you needed somebody to help your captain. In that case, in this instance, it was Brad Marchand. And both those guys, I think Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy, were trying to find their game. And now let's introduce 2 big-time free agents that the Bruins bring in, Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. Well, a guy like Elias Lindholm certainly didn't get off to the start that he wanted because he was injured in camp. Then he's placed in the number 1 center position with a guy like David Pastrnak, and Lindholm and Pastrnak have talked about it at length. It didn't work at the beginning of the season for whatever reason, but it did not work. So now you've got a trickle-down effect. So how does that impact some of the other guys on your team? And you can start to see some of the layers and some of the things that started to add it up for this Bruins team. And ultimately, it's a big reason why we're having this conversation today.
No, you make a good point. When you don't have talent, when talent's not available to you, and you mentioned the 2 guys on the back end that will play 25 minutes a night apiece, and how it affects everything that you do, all your game planning, how you play, how much possession of the puck you have, how well your power play is, how good your penalty killing is, all of those things, how you defend in your own zone, because they're defensemen and they're critical. It's the most important position outside of the goaltender, really, because of all the rule changes. It's so hard to defend in the league today when you have talent like that out of the lineup. And you know what? If they're in the lineup and you win more games, all of a sudden the leadership thing doesn't take on as much emphasis because you're still putting 2 points, in the bank on a consistent basis. And winning cures just about, all the faults within a room. But when it doesn't, when you don't have the talent and you're not winning games on a regular basis, that's when the leadership becomes exposed. And I'm not here to pick on other teams around the league, but, you talk to anybody that follows, let's say, the Buffalo Sabres. They look at that roster and say, wow, they got a lot of talent on there. They can score goals. That looks like a really good team. They have a lot of high pick, and they don't win, and they don't win at critical times because why? And everybody will tell you that watches that Buffalo team. They have a dearth of leadership, and it's been that way for almost 15 years.
And one of the things, Brick and Sophia, that I think the Bruins were counting on to be able to get them through some of the difficult times, whether they're at the beginning of the season or the middle of the season or even the end of the season, was how they were going to be able to defend. This was a team that last year, and I understand some of the names have changed, and it's hard to go year from year, but this was the 5th best defensive team in the league, and you added 2 pieces that you thought would help you defensively. And Elias Lindholm, a former Selke finalist, and Nikita Zadorov, who was going to bring some stiffness to the back end and some meanness to the back end. And yet the Bruins, heading into last night's game, or the final regular season game against the Devils, they were 25th in the league defensively. They counted on being a really good defensive team, and they had a hard time defending all season long. I think that they knew that they would have some difficulty scoring goals. They thought they would be maybe marginally better. This was a team last year that finished tied for 13th in the league offensively. And I think that they thought they would probably be around that same number. But they could always fall back on their ability to defend, and they were never able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the other low points, I guess, we wanted to touch. As Don Sweeney in the last several years, or at least since I've been around, which is only 6 seasons, trade deadline, he's always getting the biggest names and able to do that. And then obviously in the offseason, he's just so good. And the Bruins are such a draw, the city, the culture, the team, such a draw for free agents. So we get these names, Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, some of the biggest floating around. And both of them kind of have flatter seasons to start. With Elias Lindholm, we're seeing a bit of a surge near the end, which we talked about, Brick, on the show yesterday. But that definitely a low point for the Bruins. Obviously, coaching staff and management having higher expectations for them, and then those guys having higher expectations for themselves. How can something like that, also trickle into the room, Brick? Or, you kind of already answered that, but I guess that had to have been a factor too, that these big contracts, these big names came in to help, and they didn't, at least at the start.
Yeah, well, first of all, I believe that most free agents, unrestricted free agents that sign on July 1st at noontime, they're going to get more years and more money than they probably deserve. That's just the price of doing business. It's good to be in that position as a player because you're going to get paid, and you've certainly earned that opportunity to be in that free agent market. That being said, therefore, expectations, are a little exaggerated. Did either player live up to expectations? No, because they're exaggerated. Did they fall way short? I would say no. I think they both had their issues at points during the regular season, certainly earlier in the year for Zadorov, taking a ton of penalties, trying to fit in. Where do I best fit in the locker room? What kind of voice should I have? Do I have? What is expected of me in terms of leadership? Does my salary mean that I'm supposed to have a voice, or do I just go out and play my game? And it was a new pressure for both those guys, because of the money and the term that they got, expectations and so on. That changes the pressure that might be new to them, and it's a learning process. I believe both players will be much, much better next year. I liked what I've seen in the second half from Zadorov in terms of, better discipline in his game. You see how good a skater he can be. You can see how he can protect the puck in order to make plays on breakouts. It's really about decision making, and if he makes better decisions more often, he can be a highly effective guy. Going into this off season, Sophia, I'm looking for the Bruins and who's going to be their top four defensemen. I always think the elite teams have a top four, certainly a top three, but a top four for sure. And I'm not sure the Bruins are there yet, even with McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm healthy and on top of their game. Can Zadorov be one of those guys? That's the question. And I think Lindholm, I'm really encouraged by what I've seen over the last 7-8 games here of the regular season. I know people call it garbage time, but I saw things in his game that we didn't see on a consistent basis throughout the regular season. His ability to make plays, hang on to pucks, go to the right areas, be a confident player, help drive an offense, play with Pastrnak, figure out how to play with him. And I know Judd touched on it because they talked about, I got to watch this guy play all year when I wasn't playing with him, and now that I get to play with him, I have a better understanding on how to play with him to be effective. And it's a nice threesome when you add Geekie to the mix. So my expectation is that I think they will be part of the leadership group moving forward. I think this learning curve that they were on this year is going to help them in the long run. A lot has to happen in this offseason in terms of the roster construction and the young players that need to take steps in order to complete this roster. When you start thinking about next year, it's fixable, it's doable. But for me, it's all about the leadership group moving forward. I think about when Zdeno Chara signed with the Boston Bruins, and I think it surprised a lot of people that he wanted to come to Boston, and he flat out said, I'm coming to Boston, I'm going to reestablish what the Bruins are, what it means to be a Boston Bruin, and I'm going to be the captain of this team. He wasn't a Bruin. He wasn't drafted by the Bruins. He wasn't developed by the Bruins, yet he was coming here with an idea on what that room should be like. And I think if the Bruins can have more of that mentality in this offseason and what September means to this group and who the leaders are going to be and how they're going to show their leadership is going to go a long way to that retooling and how quickly they can retool.
I wish there was a guy like Zdeno Chara that were available to the Bruins in free agency, but I don't think he is because the other 31 teams would be putting their hands up and offering a max contract to a guy like that.
But don't you believe there's a collective?
Oh, absolutely.
That can add up to what Z meant to the Bruins when he came to Boston.
Yes, and to your point, Brick, I just doing a quick survey, and if there's a name that comes to mind for you guys, just thinking back, and I know, a lot of time has passed. Like, who were some of the big unrestricted free agents that were available last year that got signed, and what impact that they made? If you look at the top 25 scorers in the NHL, whether it's overall or defensemen, none of those players were free agents. None of them. So, were there trades that were made? Were there free agents that were brought in that were part of a group that started to raise the level of everybody around them? Yes. The other thing I think about, Brick, since you were talking about Lindholm and Zadorov, and I think Lindholm in particular, I think he will be markedly better. Let's assume that he's going to be healthy going through training camp. And if he is, I think that touches a variety of different areas for the Bruins because now you've got somebody who's locked in who can handle those minutes. And I think it's also important to note that if you look at his 82-game regular season sample across his career, it's not as though he's a huge offensive force. So his averages are 21 goals and 55 points. Both of those numbers would be better than the numbers that he finished with this year, which was 17 and 47. But if he's able to up his level and maintain those minutes, playing alongside a guy like David Pastrnak, that will have a trickle-down effect for your team. Are there other moves that have to be made? Yes. But I think, Brick, to your point, I think if he's a little bit better, who does that also improve down the road? How does that help your leadership group? I think that will be one of the things that we'll talk about leading into next season for the Boston Bruins.
Absolutely. Brick, if you have a thought, I'm pausing you for a quick second. Sometimes we just get off on these lovely tangents. I feel like we're just talking hockey, but we are recording a show, so I have a promo to read for you guys. But just reminding fans, obviously we know we've been talking about all show that the Bruins are out of the postseason, but they're still professional hockey in Boston as the Boston Fleet make their push to the PWHL playoffs. So you guys can check out the latest episode of Nesson's Respect Her Game podcast. We're going to have all the latest on the Boston's Fleet quest for the Walter Cup, and you can find it on all the usuals: YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and wherever else you get your podcast. So, Judd, you had a really good thought there. Sorry to pause you on that.
No, not at all, Sophia. And I'm actually going to interject with one thing. I apologize. Because, Brick, I was thinking about the conversation that we had with the general manager, Don Sweeney, toward the tail end of the season. And we're talking about the leadership group and the culture of the team. That I went back and I listened to the interview because I wanted to make sure that I have it correctly. That one of the things that he said when he talked about the culture is that we cannot take it for granted anymore that it just exists. We have to reestablish that. And we have to do a better job of cultivating that in our group and bringing in people from the outside. And as much as we talk about skill and talent for the Bruins, they have to bring in the right players into the mix, and that players understand, this is Don Sweeney continuing, that both on the ice and in the leadership role, I cannot defer.
Yeah, that's spot on. Couldn't agree more, and that's why I keep going back to that. That's the number one element that needs to be addressed in this offseason is the leadership and the culture. If you establish that or get it moving in that direction, reestablishing and strengthening it because it has changed since we've moved on from past the last 2 decades. Before you even start talking about, better goaltending, before you even start talking about better team defense, before you start talking about better center iceman play, strength down the middle, it has to start with the leadership and the culture. If you can get that going where it needs to be, within the room, on the ice, practice habits, playing habits, game management, all that stuff is an extension of the leadership. That's why we keep talking about it, because it's the most important aspect of this retool.
And Brick, I know you don't go into the room, Judd. You do get stories and interviews. I obviously joined right after trade deadline, so late. So I didn't even get to say goodbye to the core. And then all of a sudden there was this like void in the room. I am someone who, and I think, Brick, we recorded a podcast a couple weeks ago. I said the same thing. I don't like taking a narrative that was created and just running with it. And there was if there isn't any validity to it. And sometimes with media and the internet, it spreads like a virus. When someone says something, they're like, oh, Pasta is going to emerge as the next leader. I'd like to feel if there's truth to that, just because he's been there the longest, and Charlie McAvoy obviously being injured, just because he's kind of next in line and wore the 8 doesn't mean there's truth to that. So I didn't really like talking about that until I felt that there could be. And holy hell, did I feel a difference in David Pastrnak after the trade deadline as a person, with his patience, with how he answered questions. And I can give you guys an example. It was several years ago, so maybe 4 years ago. Pasta was in so Bergeron still would have been there, and Nick Foligno, I believe, maybe it was 3 years ago, was there. But there was this core that he was part of, but just not the main guy. Anyway, and there was a scrum that was taking a really long time to end, as usual, 10 people around him, and he was getting impatient, which is normal. I get it. You're answering the same questions. He's kind of getting impatient. He kind of wanted to end it himself. He was like, okay, guys, I think we're done. And was trying to leave and couldn't, because people kept asking him questions. But when he left, it was kind of like abrupt, and I'm not knocking him for that at all. But that's just kind of sometimes how he was in scrums. And now his body language reminds me very much of Brad's and Patrice's. Like, he's kind of leaning against his stall. He's not going anywhere. He's going to answer all the questions. He takes accountability. He's candid in his answers. And I know that's not, a huge characteristic that is going to make or break the leader, but there's a difference in patience. There's a difference in duty. There's a difference in responsibility that I'm feeling from him. And so that narrative that was created somewhere, I really think there's validity to David Pastrnak completely stepping up. I'm not sure, and locker cleanout is going to be today, Thursday. So I'm hoping somebody asks about, did he have a conversation with the coaching staff? Did he see a couple games go by and decide, I'm doing this? Because it felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. It was this leap after the trade deadline. And I don't know if, Judd, if you would agree with me, or maybe you've been around all season. I haven't. Did you see it kind of creeping up throughout the whole season?
Well, I'll jump in for a second before you answer, Judd. It didn't come out of nowhere. This is a guy that played with. He played with Chara. He played with Bergeron. He played with Marchand. And he has talked about trying to be more like them his whole career. Learn from them. Learn to be a 200-foot player on the ice, number one, but learn from their maturity and their wisdom on how to operate within the room, within the team structure. And I think because of two things. Because of what was happening within the room and players moving on at the trade deadline, that the opportunity for this part of his growth as an athlete was ripe. It was the time, and he recognized it, and he went about it the right way. And the other factor there is how good he was playing on the ice. They go hand in glove. If you are a dominant player, if you are controlling games, if you're driving offense, if you're factoring in 13 straight goals for your team, you are on top of your game. Now people really, not only do they take notice of you because you're a great player and you've been around, you're one of the senior players and you have tenure. Yeah, that gets recognition. But when you combine the two and you've moved on from your captain and the leadership is changing and you're trying to find some solid footing in terms of leadership, the time was right for David and his maturity to emerge, and I think that's the perfect storm that you're talking about.
To Brick's point, I definitely think that this had been building, and I want to draw a parallel between him and a guy like Brad Marchand. After the series against the Tampa Bay Lightning back in 2018, there was a change in Brad Marchand. Obviously, there was the incident with Ryan Callahan, but he had a conversation with Cam Neely, with the head coach at the time, Bruce Cassidy, and they were very close. And one of the things that was imparted on him was, what do you want your legacy to be? And I think along with that conversation and being at Patrice Bergeron's side for so long, that when you heard him talk, the way he sounded, it sounded like a captain. And this was while Bergeron was still with the team. And then when Bergeron finally decided to retire, it was an easy decision for Brad to take on the C. And the way that David Pastrnak has talked, not just this year, but in the last couple of seasons. And let's also add a guy like David Krejci, who was a very big impact for a guy like David Pastrnak, that you could hear the way that David Pastrnak was speaking and how he would address not only the media, but what you would hear about how he was talking to his team, how he was talking to the brass, that this had been coming. And I think back to a guy like David Krejci. I still have this quote in my notes. When he first showed up at 18 years old, you knew he had the skills. He's going to be a good player, but you can't predict the career that he's going to have. And I'm really happy how far he has come. And there's only one thing he's missing. And I think he's got an opportunity here with the Bruins to land that Stanley Cup championship. But listen to the way he talks. Listen to how he phrases it. Even a guy like Mark Kastelik, I remember having a conversation after the trade deadline, and I'm sure it was very sobering for a guy like David Pastrnak. I know it's had an impact on a guy like Charlie McAvoy, seeing some of the departures that Kastelik mentioned, that you can hear David Pasternak's voice a lot more in the room. It certainly sounds different overall because of all the voices that had departed at that point, and your captain and Brad Marchand, and then guys like Carlo and Coyle, et cetera. But you could hear a guy like David Pastrnak a little bit more, and I think it was very organic, very honest, and very genuine.
And I would add one other thing while we're on this topic, and we've been on it for quite a while because it's the most important one. One of the storylines that we all talked about as a group at the beginning of this season was the emerging of being a significant part of the leadership group was going to be Charlie McAvoy. And that didn't happen. It didn't happen for a number of reasons. And that will be a storyline for us going into next season. We can talk about, the impact of Zadorov and Lindholm and how much better they'll be next year in terms of the on-ice play and being part of the leadership moving forward. We can talk about the emerging leadership qualities of David Pastrnak. But 73, because of who he is, the player that he's capable of being, and the command that he can have, that was the expectations that was going to happen this year. He was going to mature into that player that knew how to control a game when a game needed to be controlled to make sure you won a hockey game. And for a number of reasons, part of it was injury, part of it was not having his own believability in his game, and because the team was struggling and there were a lot of question marks and they couldn't find solutions, that it didn't emerge. It just didn't emerge. Well, it's going to need to emerge, at least in that direction, next year. That's also a big part of moving forward with this group.
I have a thought on that, but once again, guys, paying some bills over here. So just going to do a little promo and we can continue that conversation. Reminding everyone, NESN 360, I think I've said this on the show before, that's where I watch all my NESN content, and you can stream it, take it anywhere you want. And obviously we're in the Red Sox season now, so remember to stream the entire Red Sox season with a NESN 360 annual plan. It is now at an all-new reduced price of just $20 a month, paid annually. That's just for a limited time, so get on it. And you can also get 4 free tickets to Fenway with your purchase. Visit NESN360.com to sign up today. Okay, back to McAvoy, and I do really want to throw the question about Geekie being part of this core, depending on how his contract goes. But back to McAvoy, yeah, Brick, that's something that when I mentioned the, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, like his name was thrown around of like, oh, okay, McAvoy's going to be this emerging leader, but you don't like to run with it until you see it either. And that's something, like you said, we didn't have an opportunity to see much this season, and the break, the injury had a lot to do with it. But he himself, going through some personal changes. We know David Pastrnak had some personal hardships at a young age earlier in his career. And he himself has said that shapes you. McAvoy, now a father, McAvoy going through this weird, a lot of frustration there, not being able to complete his tenure with Team USA, and then now missing the rest of the season. Those things will hopefully, if you use them, shape you as a person. Is this, I wouldn't call it a make or break year because his contract is very, very big, but is this a pivotal season for him then next year to do all the things you're talking about, Brick?
I believe so. And I think he believes so. And, I was so hopeful that Four Nations experience for Charlie McAvoy was going to be a springboard to getting him going where I certainly wanted him to go. I wanted him to go in there, play best on best, be a really important player for a team that was awesome to watch, Team USA. It was such a home run for every aspect of hockey when they had US Canada in the final in the Garden. It was awesome, and he couldn't be a part of it. And and then the injury knocks him out for the rest of the regular season. So instead of it being a real confidence booster and a coming out for this season and coming back to Boston after having that experience and being a big part of Team USA and their success, would help him in that, all right, here I am. I'm the guy. I'm the alpha dog on the back end. He has been for a while, but I was hoping that it would be just what the Bruins wanted, just what Charlie wanted, just what we all wanted, and it ended up being just the opposite. Because of the injury, the infection, and then all the question marks that came with it. And that was, we talk about highs and lows. For me, that was a big low for the Bruins this year.
Brick and Sophia, I think the other thing, since we're having this conversation about Charlie McAvoy and David Pastrnak, and obviously, we've touched a little bit on the offseason and what the Bruins are going to do, and there's certainly going to be some changes, and they're certainly going to try and improve some of the talent level on the team, and we're talking about culture. But I think if we look at the Bruins overall, the solutions for this team heading into next season, they have to come from within. They are not going to come necessarily with a signing. I think that a signing or a trade can certainly help. I don't think there's any question. But the answers that I think the team is looking for, they have to be in the room. They are in the room.
Yeah, I mean, I like you echoing that sentiment, because even myself as a broadcaster leading into questions, I always say this summer is going to be big, and it is going to be big for the Bruins. But I think part of me is thinking, they're going to bring in some players that are going to help with that. But you, as a player, you can't have that mentality that you're looking for something outside to kind of come in and rescue. It's got to come from within, and whatever comes from the outside is just going to build on that. Really quick, because I do want to get in Joe Sacco and his future, and Brick, you had a great interview with him yesterday, so we'll touch on that. But really quick, I think, Brick, you were saying that Morgan Geekie, great player, great person to talk to, but I believe you were talking about him when you said he's not just all hockey, a very intelligent man, great interview, good character person. So I'd like to throw him into, if we're talking about a core, that core can be 4 or 5 players. If he re-signs with the Bruins and keeps up his performance, I truly believe he can be a big part of this leadership core and group as well. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I think any player that that has career years and then can handle the pressure of expectation the following season is obviously part of your leadership group, and that's the expectation from Morgan Geekie because of the way he carries himself. You see these guys, they do interviews, you do enough of them, so if the guys that look you in the eye, they listen to your question, they give you a thoughtful answer, it's a sign of maturity. It's a sign of a guy that gets it, that he has a good understanding, that he has gray matter that he applies to the game to make him a better player. Always thinking, always trying to figure out another way to do things. How best do I fit in with this line? What can I do as an individual player with my own skill set that's going to benefit the other two guys that I play with or the other four guys that I'm on the ice with? And I think Morgan Geekie's got all that, and I think it's one of the reasons he had 33 goals or whatever he finished the year with, and has emerged as a really good player. You see this kid, you see how big he is, you see how strong he is, you appreciate his quickness on the ice. Do not underestimate all of those aspects of his game, because he'll beat you if you do underestimate. There are certain guys in the league that have that, and he's one of them, and that is a feel-good story from this year, the emergence of Morgan Geekie and where he came from as early as September, October, November, when things weren't going his way, and to see what he was as a finished product at the end of the year. So, yes, he can be part of the leadership group. We continue to talk about how that leadership group is going to come together. The question for me, when you get into personnel, and this is a conversation that, we could do another 3 shows on, is, top 4 defense and top 6 forward group. Judd, you say, the solutions have to come from within. I think in the trade market and the free agency market, you can address those 2 issues for me, because I'm not sure that it is available to the Bruins right now based on the roster that they have.
I would agree, Brick, that they certainly have to improve the top 6. But I also don't want to discount the bottom 6. If you look at not just this season, but really last season, I don't think Jim Montgomery, and I know it seems like it was miles away talking about last season, but I don't think Jim Montgomery had a bottom 6 that he trusted. He certainly didn't have a fourth line that he trusted. And I think if you go back and look, whether it's the Bruins teams that really had good runs, or you look at the teams that are now some of the better teams in the National Hockey League, yes, you have a good top 6, but you also have a bottom 6 that you can trust. So the Bruins have to address certainly the talent that they have in that top 6 group, but they also really have to help themselves out in that bottom 6. Yes, they have to bolster a little bit of the back end. Obviously, you've got a departure in Brandon Carlos, so what does that look like on the right side? Who's going to man some of those minutes? But I think overall, and now we're getting into some of the heavy lifting that really has to take place for the team, whether it's through free agency, trades, or from some of the solutions that have to come from within the roster.
Yeah, and I think if you talk to the head coaches, and I know you want to talk about Joe Sacco, if you talk to the head coaches around the National Hockey League, I think all of them, to a man, would say, good teams, they have a good top 6. The really good teams, the teams that are going to contend for the Stanley Cup, they're 3 lines deep. And, to your point, Judd, you need a fourth line, you need an identity line, you need a line that can maybe change momentum, and you want that consistency from that fourth line. But the really good teams, they roll 9. They roll 9 in the forward group.
Absolutely. Brick, sorry we're not going to expand on that thought because we only have about 7 minutes left in the show, and we definitely want to address this coaching situation. Before we kind of get into talking about Joe Sacco, let's play the interview you had with him after the final game of the season.
You took over this team, after the first, 16, 17, 18 games, whatever it was. But it was a year of challenging circumstances. Just your final thoughts on what your experience has been like here as we wrap up this regular season.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit emotional, obviously. I think that, when the change happened, I think it was around the 20-game mark. We started to get things turned around. The guys started to play better hockey. We were better defensively. It started to slip a little bit around the new year, and then obviously at the deadline there was some changes that were made to the group. No, I've enjoyed the experience, Brick. It's like you said, it's been challenging, but that's part of the job, right? And I think that being from this area and having the opportunity to coach the Bruins is very special to me.
Well, from all of us here at Nesson, and certainly from myself, we appreciate you taking some minutes right after a game, win or lose, to come on and give us your insights and give us your thoughts on what just transpired. So we thank you for that.
Thanks, Brick. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Well, gem of a human being, Joe Sacco, and going to be an interesting summer for him. There are 3 possible scenarios, and I'd like to get your thoughts on them. Obviously, one scenario could be that he comes back as the head coach. The other is that he remains on the staff as an assistant, which would be weird to go from a head coach down to assistant, or he's not with the Bruins organization anymore, guys. He was obviously looked like he was a little bit emotional there at the end, but he was also taking this all in because he doesn't know what's going to happen this summer, and it was a weird year for him to take over, as you mentioned. I don't want to ask predictions because that's not really fair, but maybe an assessment on the season that was with all the weird cards he was dealt, guys.
Well, a lot of moving parts and a lot of different ways you can try to answer that question. He's been part of the Bruins coaching staff for better than a decade. I think the Bruins value Joe Sacco as a hockey coach, a guy that has the ability to teach, a guy that has a good understanding of the game, a guy that can message the right way to today's players. I think Joe Sacco as a head coach, I think he went in with his eyes wide open into the situation that he was inheriting when they moved on from Jim Montgomery. I think he understood the challenges that were in front of him and, what was happening with the Bruins in terms of how the room was changing, the leadership was changing, the uncertainty of contracts and leadership. But as a coach, when you've had head coaching experience at the NHL, you want another kick at the can. You want a second chance, if not a third chance, or not a fourth chance. The stuff that you've learned, the experience and the maturity that you've gotten since the last time you had the reins in your hand as the head coach. And I think that's the biggest reason that he was willing to accept the challenge that was offered to him when the coaching change was made. Where the Bruins go from here, I have no idea, but I feel like the Bruins certainly value Joe. They want him to be part of the equation moving forward. Whether Joe wants to be a part of that, if he's not the head coach, that's certainly up to him and his family and whatever decision. But I'll tell you right now, the coaches that have been here, that Joe has worked for, whether it was Bruce Cassidy or Jim Montgomery, I know those guys value him, and that if Joe was available and a free agent, I think it would be another one of those situations where a Bruins coach would be swallowed up in quick order if he was looking to make a coaching change to a different organization.
I think he did a really respectable job considering the situation. He was trying to put the team back on track after the first 20 games where they were one game under 500 against Jim Montgomery. And they obviously started to turn it around heading into the Christmas break. It was after the Christmas break, and as Joe alluded to, heading into the Four Nations tournament, that the Bruins just couldn't reclaim some of the rhythm that they had heading into that Christmas break. And that's part of the reason that we're having this conversation here today. But he did a really respectable job, and he is really respected around the league and in the room. I thought it was interesting that Morgan Geekie was asked about him after the game, and he said, listen, Joe's awesome, and he was put in a tough situation. And Brick, I don't know how you feel, but I think a testament to how the players feel about the head coach is the effort that they're putting in on a night-in, night-out basis, and this team did not check out.
Oh, I thought that was a question for Brick. Sorry, sorry, guys. I just kind of left you hanging. Brick, do you want to say anything to that, or should I move on and wrap the show?
No, I mean, I agree with Judd. Judd and I have had these conversations all year, certainly when things were at their worst. You're on the road, you spend time together, you talk hockey, you talk Bruins, you talk where are the solutions. How do the coaches get the Bruins to play better, more consistent? How do you eliminate the mistakes that and we have all those conversations all the time. So this is not fresh material between Judd and I. When we've talked about Joe and his ability to try to get the most out of the roster that he was given, and it was challenging. It was really hard. This is a league where talent wins. If everyone says, well, hard work can outperform talent. Well, if everybody works hard and that's equal, what wins? Talent wins. And the Bruins need more talent. The Bruins need more talent. It's that simple.
Yeah, so Sophia, that was actually a quick conversation that we probably had at the London pub at the tail end of the season in Montreal.
Our only trip into Montreal.
Not enough.
Yeah, exactly. Not enough. Which you guys will have plenty of chances to have conversations together off the record, and hopefully I can join you guys as well, as we're officially done on the Bruins season after 82 games, first time missing the postseason in 9, and have to reiterate that the summer, even though some of the answers got to be from within, as you mentioned, Judd, the summer is going to be huge for the Boston Bruins in terms of coaching, leadership, trades, signings, all that kind of stuff. And we are going to be on all summer, so we'll obviously be able to address that on the Hockey Hub as the news comes down. But for now, we'll say goodbye. Thanks for joining us as usual, gentlemen, and enjoy your summers. We'll be touching base with both of you together or individually throughout. But it's been a treat as always to work with you. Sad we're not going beyond the regular season, but still a treat nonetheless. And thanks for your time. We'll wrap up the Hockey Hub episode 56. We'll see you guys next week.